welcome to Talent Buzz, where I talk with SaaS companies on how they are doing their talent acquisition. I've been asking around who I should be inviting as a guest, and a lot of people have mentioned that, hey, you should ask Otto from Swarmia to join. So today we are talking with Otto on how Swarmia has built a world-class tech team. And let's start things off by asking Otto, what is your secret sauce?
Well, I don't think there's a shortcut, but indeed, we just had our first employee engagement survey, and everyone was saying that they really love working with the team. It's the kind of most experienced and kind of best in kind of just like a communication and otherwise like just a great team to work with. So indeed, it seems that we've done a good job there, but also the reality is that I've hired a few hundred people over my career. And so there's many things that you get from that are not easy to replicate. But I would say that maybe the biggest part is that I do have a pretty good idea of what is good for many of these early stage startup roles. And that also means that we've been able to take some shortcuts whenever it makes sense. So if we absolutely know that this is a person we want on the team, we're not going to bother with sending them some homework as part of the recruiting process or anything like that. We're going to work on getting them committed to joining the team, kind of getting them to meet everyone else, getting excited about the customers we're working with, and so on. So we can break the rules whenever we have to, so that we're able to actually get that team built. So that doesn't mean that I'm saying that skip recruiting process and skip interviewing, but the reality is that we made some really great hires with that. So when you have an idea who you want to be on the team, then just go for it.
Yeah, I love that tip. And I think the recruitment market has really changed on kind of how it used to be in the past, that you really need to be validating candidates only. You have a lot of people applying, validate. And nowadays, I feel like if you want to have the best possible team, it's actually more about selling the idea, selling the company, selling the product, and making it as easy as possible for people to join the team. So good points over there. Can you share a bit on the kind of starting of Swarmia? So kind of what was the problem that you noticed, and kind of why did you decide to launch this business?
Well, I was previously the chief product officer at Smartly.io, and my organization was about 100 people. And when you grow, you start to experience all kinds of growing pains. Things that used to be really quick to do, they just start taking forever. And usually you have no idea, why does it take so long for us to get something done? And the reality is that this just happens automatically when the complexity grows. And so we want to help software development organizations spot these bottlenecks as they emerge, so that it's very easy for teams to kind of take note and fix them, rather than letting them to accumulate to something that's going to take you years and millions of euros to fix at later stages. So we bring data to kind of engineering management and to kind of discussions about development productivity, but we're doing it in a way that actually helps developers get on board. And so that's kind of the idea. And it's very much from my own experiences, but as I started talking to a bunch of other engineering leaders, I pretty much noticed that this is a universal pattern that happens almost everywhere.
Yeah. Typically when I talk with SaaS founders, there are multiple founders in a SaaS company, at least most of the SaaS companies that I know, but you founded Swarmia kind of by yourself. When did you make your kind of first hires for the company? Did you work on the idea or the product by yourself for a while, and then, or was it kind of on the beginning when you already hired the first employee for the team?
It happened quite quickly. So when I left Smartly, first I just watched Netflix for a month. Then I kind of got bored with that, I basically got a summer job at Swappy, which is one of my investments. I went to code with a team. I helped to kickstart the new e-commerce site. And on the side, I was thinking, what should I build next? I have this process for gathering ideas for a startup. So I just write them in this one note that I have. It has probably 100 entries by now. And I normally never open the document. So I only opened it after I had left Smartly and I started figuring out what to do next. So then I just took the top 5 ideas that looked the most promising. I started Googling around what seems interesting. And it probably didn't take me more than a day to settle with this that we're now building at Swarmia. Then I started by talking with a bunch of engineering leaders. So I booked 2 trips to San Francisco. This was pre-COVID. So I kind of just went there, started booking meetings with engineering leaders and talking about how they view this space and what the optimal solution would look like, and came up with a set of product principles that's actually basically defining our positioning still to date. So that early research was actually pretty foundational in that. And after that, it all happened pretty quickly. So I did talk to a few VCs. We raised the first funding round from Lifeline pretty much while incorporating the company. And we had the first 2 people, Juha and Mika, starting pretty much, well, we consider that to be the kind of founding date of the company. Technically, it was incorporated 2 weeks earlier, but they started pretty much right away. And we've been working together on this ever since. So I decided to start the company by myself so that I'm able to allocate a lot of equity for the people who are actually building it. So that we can afford to fundraise whenever we need to, and so on. So that turned out to be kind of a good thing for us because we managed to build the team gradually over time. So roles that we didn't necessarily need in the first year, we filled them later, etc. So it's actually worked pretty well for us.
Yeah. Can you share a bit more on kind of sharing the equity of the company? Great learning for me as well. We are now in a situation of hiring our first employees on the team, and we have had a lot of discussions on the model that we should be building there. Like, should we give equity as a kind of sign-up bonus, or should we have some kind of option program, or should we offer the people opportunities to actually get way higher equity of the company if they are willing to come work with a little lower than market rate salary, and a lot of different options over there. So can you share a bit more on kind of your approach on kind of sharing the equity?
I think sharing equity with the employees is a fundamental decision that the company needs to make. If you want to be a Silicon Valley style startup that's actually going to be global, growing fast, you need the best employees. And realistically, in the early days, you're not going to be able to pay the base salaries that these people could be making elsewhere. So there needs to be a stock component. We allocated 20% of the company to the employees already in the very beginning. Normally, that number would be maybe 10%. So we kind of wanted to make sure that we have enough in the option pool for that. There's different ways to arrange that, but I consider that mostly logistics. So whether it's stock options, or there's in Finland now, there's a new way to kind of issue shares to employees in a very cost-effective way. The way we're arranging this is we're just trying to be kind of as fair and as generous as possible, and employees get to choose how do they actually subscribe to this. So there's a couple of different options depending on how much money you're able to put in initially, if at all, and which affects the tax treatment you're going to get in the longer term. So you can kind of choose the type of risk you want to work with, and we'll try to accommodate that.
Yeah, exactly. Then I would like to speak a bit about kind of networks and their and kind of how they help in recruitments. This is actually weird. We did a small pilot project last spring, and I actually didn't realize at that time like how big networks do you have. But now I have actually noticed when kind of sharing with some discussion that hey, we did a pilot project with Swarmia, and I feel like every CTO in Finland knows Otto. Like I I have come to that conclusion. So can you share a bit more on kind of how you have been building networks? Has it been kind of a strategic decision that hey, I will be building a lot of networks and that will help me in my future hires?
Yeah, I mean, building networks has definitely been very useful in terms of the recruiting, and getting to know as many CTOs as possible is definitely a part of building the type of company that we're doing. At the same time, for me personally, it's really been that I've stumbled upon a few communities that I really liked. Personally, it's been a lot of it has been about volunteering in different organizations, doing something kind of for the common good, and then ending up meeting a bunch of great people there. So turns out there's been quite a few of those over the years. So I started maybe with organizing Assembly, the computer festival event, already like a long time ago. That led to some of the first business we got in my first company. So I kind of quickly noticed that you can actually meet some people here who have relevance in the business life too. And the same thing was, I was the chairman of the Computer Science Students Guild in the university, then more involved with Junction, the hackathon, which I'm still involved with, different meetups, all the Otto ES communities, all the CTO communities, etc. So just kind of like to meet people with similar interests, and these communities have tended to be a very good place for that. So I've really enjoyed my time with those, and definitely made many friends from those circles.
Yeah. I think one source of candidate for a lot of SaaS founders are the people that they kind of used to work with in the past. But I think at the same time there is kind of one challenge that I feel like a lot of founders might be having is like, even though I know a lot of people from my past work, you just cannot kind of recruit everyone. Kind of even though you wouldn't have any kind of agreement that hey, you cannot do that one. At some point, you piss someone off. It's bad for your brand reputation. So, would you say that there is some kind of unwritten rule, like how many people you can take from your past teams or the places that you have worked at in the past?
I don't know if there's a rule, but I think you probably don't want to be purely recruiting from your old coworkers. You're not trying to replicate your old job's culture, for example. You're trying to build something of your own. And I think the cool thing about Helsinki startup scene at the moment, for example, is that there's so many good companies that you can hire from. So the fact that we can have people who built similar things at Supermetrics and Ivan and Smartly and Volt or whoever, like all these great companies, it just means that we're going to be able to build a culture that's a combination of kind of the good stuff from many of these companies. So yes, it's definitely made a few hires easier to have worked with that person before, but at the same time, you should really try to build something that that goes beyond your existing network. But also, of course, the reality at a startup is that you have limited number of people who are even interested in your company, and then you have no idea how to evaluate some specific role, and you might just want to kind of take the easy way. And it's like, after interviewing a lot of people for Smartly, I know that the few people who were really great there, they are absolutely kind of top of the talent pool that I could find anywhere else. So obviously, when they showed interest in joining Swarmia, of course, we were happy to work together again.
Yeah. It's always a kind of big decision on who you should be hiring next, like, and what are the things that you should be prioritizing. Question regarding on that one: who is the next person you will be hiring, and why for that kind of role?
Well, I think the basic philosophy we have is that we're always trying to bring something new to the team. And it can be a specific skill set. It can be the type of personality. It can be the type of companies you work with in the past. So we now made a few hires who are about to start. One is a software engineer who's worked with a bunch of great companies, including Google and Facebook, and a bunch of Finnish growth companies as well, and then kind of tiny startups, etc. So just bringing someone with experience from those companies is going to be interesting for us because, again, they will bring some new to every discussion we're having as a team. And the other person we just brought in is kind of great working with brands and visual design and everything else. So that's a skill set that we kind of have in the team, at least a little bit with some of the existing people. But someone who's actually been able to dedicate their time on that is going to take us to the next level in that area as well. So that's pretty much how we're thinking about it, so that we're always creating a team that's going to be stronger afterwards.
Yeah. And then kind of additional to the kind of skill set that person is bringing, can you share a bit more on kind of how do you kind of build a good team from cultural perspective of things, like make sure that the team is diverse and all that?
Yeah, there's so many different factors that affect someone's kind of personality and how they contribute to a team. So we already mentioned a few things like kind of the companies they work with, but then there's also different factors on what kind of things they are most interested in, how they want to develop. And you want to make sure that people have kind of a complementary skill sets and complementary interests, because ultimately you're going to have a limited number of opportunities to do any one thing in the organization. So it's going to be a lot easier if people find slightly different things interesting. And I don't know if there's any kind of a formula for determining what those factors are. I'm always surprised when I find some kind of a interest or kind of hobby that someone has. For example, one of our developers has been hosting a podcast, which was a great background. He has kind of a very unique insight into the developer community and how developers like to learn about new technologies and all these different things. So that was kind of a factor that I did not consider that to be a part of our evaluation matrix of any sorts. And yet, when I heard about it, I was immediately thrilled to know that, okay, we're going to have this one additional kind of skill set and personality in the team. So it can be almost anything. And I think you kind of just keep an open mind and try to get to know the person and figure out what it could be that they can bring to the team.
Yeah. I like what you said in the beginning regarding breaking the rules, and I try to do the same as well, because I feel like in recruitment the things have been done in quite similar way for a very, very long time. So I'm always like figuring out, like, is everything necessary? What are the parts you can skip? Are there things that you can do differently? But I think kind of skipping out some kind of technical test is, I think it's still quite kind of new kind of thinking, and I think most of the SaaS companies want to put, for example, developers to do something. So can you share a bit more on, like, how do you think you should be kind of testing, for example, technical people, and when you shouldn't be doing that one?
Yeah, indeed. Well, we built kind of a bit different types of recruiting processes at Smartly and now here at Swarmia. But ultimately, it's actually surprisingly similar. So first of all, things I don't like. I think the algorithmic puzzles and the lead code type of challenges are one of the biggest issues in the industry. I have went to the university to study data structures and algorithms, etc., and yet I still couldn't do most of those challenges at the moment. So it's just not representative of what regular developers do on a daily basis. It might make sense for someone like Google, where they built the entire infrastructure themselves and they're not using anything kind of off the shelf standard tools. So they kind of have to focus on fundamentals instead of kind of learned experience in the role. So I see way too many companies trying to copy someone else's recruiting process when it doesn't necessarily make sense. And what we talked about, skipping some parts of the process, I already mentioned homework. I wouldn't send homework to a senior developer who is seriously considering your company. Like, it's going to have an impact on the conversion rate of your recruiting funnel. And you're simply going to close fewer great people if you kind of make people do some busy work that they should definitely be expected to be able to complete based on their job history. So I would recommend being a little bit careful how much you expect people to put time for these things in this very competitive market. Ultimately, the process we have is pretty simple. So first, you spend 1 hour with the team lead you're going to be working with. That's just basically going through your profile, understanding the kind of shape of your skill set. So where are your strengths? What kind of are the potential weaknesses? And based on that, we should be able to say that if everything that they just described to us is true, then we would want to place them in this kind of a position. So we want to establish that from the early stage. Then the second part of the interviewing is 2 hours with 2 of the developers in a tech interview. So that serves 2 purposes. One is meeting the more people from the team, and the other one is simply getting to talk about multiple topics in the tech domain. It's pretty easy to talk about tech for a few minutes, and especially in that kind of very high-level interview. But if you actually go deeper to topics with someone who actually knows all of these things, then no one can pass for 2 hours kind of just talking about things that they really don't understand. So I find that's the kind of fundamental like validation piece of the interview. And then finally, the candidate spends 1 hour with the CEO or CTO or whoever is the hiring manager. In this case, it's me. So I mostly want to learn about their kind of how they would fit the team, what kind of things they're interested in, kind of that team building element and cultural aspects. So most of the validation is already kind of done by that stage.
Yeah. And is it basically that that person needs to get a yes from everyone they kind of encounter on the way? Or for example, let's say in the last stage, you have already kind of validated that, hey, they have the skills, but then for some reason, for example, you think that maybe this person isn't a cultural fit. Like, do you say no at this stage, or kind of who makes the final hiring decision currently?
Yeah. Currently, the final hiring decision is made by me after kind of compiling all of the information together. I do think that hiring decisions are one of the things that are not in the team's responsibility alone, especially when you grow a lot and there's a lot to do. Teams have a tendency of kind of wanting to solve the bottleneck by bringing in someone else. And I do think that the decision to bring in a new team member is one of the most significant ones that we're making on a constant basis. So it does require kind of some additional validation from outside of the team. Of course, it's largely based on the work that the team has been doing in the interviews, but it's also good to note, and this is why we ask people to write pretty kind of thorough notes from the interviews. It's very easy to have this kind of recency bias or kind of just pick up like things that like it was great to have this conversation. It was a good vibe overall. But then when you look at the notes, you realize that actually they didn't answer any of the questions very well. So it is worth running that extra check at some point. And of course, there's different ways to handle this as you grow. But right now it's kind of me looking at this like full list. And we have definitely rejected candidates at this last stage too. I think the big part of it is then usually about some alignment on kind of where the bar is. In our case, we are a small company. We don't have many openings. So we have to be really careful with any of the hires. And we're in a unique place where we can say no to candidates that pretty much every other startup would love to hire, and we would love to hire them at later stages too. But the reality is that if we only have one opening for a developer at the moment, it's going to go for someone who's kind of really unique.
Yeah, yeah. And then kind of addition to the kind of validating of candidates, we could talk a bit more about kind of selling the company. And that is, of course, I think it's a kind of long process. So basically everything you see on social media, everything you hear on different communities about Swarmia is, of course, kind of affecting the first impression that kind of potential employees are having from you. And then, of course, kind of during all the interviews, you are as well doing the selling. So can you share a bit more, like how do you approach selling Swarmia, and what do you think that are the kind of best selling points that you have found for the company?
Yeah, well, selling to the candidates is part of every single stage of the interviewing. So sometimes the first interview can be largely about selling the company, and the best candidates you can recognize by kind of the questions they're asking and kind of how they are almost driving the interview, because they have a very good idea of what they're expecting, what kind of company cultures exist, what do they like, what do they know that they're not going to thrive in, and so on. So I think you need to be able to spend as much time on that as possible. You need to be able to call in help in the sales. So, for example, I'm happy to meet candidates in the earlier stages if that's helpful for the hiring process, and so on. So the same applies to the technical interview. It's not a very good dynamic if someone's just asking you a lot of questions and then always moving on to the next one without any feedback. But if you just reserve a little bit more time, you're going to be able to always comment that, okay, yeah, that's great. We actually are doing it this way, etc., explaining how we're doing things. And it can be these kind of very practical things about real life examples of how we work that actually gets candidates convinced. Because the reality is that the world is full of companies where even though the business might be doing pretty well, the engineering organization hasn't been built in a very thought out way. So if you're able to say that, yes, we've been thinking about this from the beginning, the team is very experienced and understands this, we have a very good dynamic on problem solving, that's a great selling point. And you don't want to be just overly positive either, because candidates will understand if you're kind of just selling this dreamy picture of kind of something that's probably not true. So if you're able to say that, yes, we're having these challenges, this is how we're solving them, these are the kind of discussions we're having at the moment, that's a great way to get them to really get excited about your company.
Yeah, yeah. Have you noticed big difference? Like, at least if I look to you as a company, like I feel like you have good employer brand for technical people. Like a lot of technical people want to join. You are kind of messaging, I would say, quite well, like what kind of place you are work for a technical person. But let's say that kind of when you hire people for commercial roles like marketing, sales, like has it been kind of harder because you are not that well known in that target group?
Yeah, every company has some audiences that's easier to reach and some audiences that are more difficult to reach. I would say we have the opposite situation that we had at Smartly, because Smartly being an online advertising automation company, it's easy to hire marketers. Marketers have already been Smartly's customers, and like many of them became to be customer success managers at Smartly, etc. So it was very easy for those roles. And it was extremely difficult for developers, because advertising is not one of the topics that developers are usually, at least existingly, excited about. And we had to build the case around things like the complexity of the technical challenges you're going to be able to solve here, and the scale of challenges we're facing, and kind of the company growth and the company culture, etc. So we managed to turn that into a pretty good case so that we were able to hire some really good developers. But realistically, it was always kind of headwind. So we kind of, like, it would have been a lot easier in some other environment. And similarly at Swarmia, it's a pretty technical topic. And it makes it easy to hire developers when developers get to think about developer productivity and that kind of stuff. They get to build stuff that their friends are going to be using, which is really motivating. Luckily, there's quite a few developer tooling companies and companies working around software development organization and project management and this kind of stuff. So there's plenty of people who are very interested in this kind of a domain. We have people who maybe used to be developers and then transition to the business side. And this is kind of an optimal company for them where they get to use that experience with the role that they're currently looking for. So we definitely have a long way to go in terms of employer branding. It's not really a topic we are talking about at the moment. It's really something that we kind of just put something together. But also the reality is that a lot of it is just about the type of company you're trying to build, and the employer branding cannot change what you kind of are or are not. So in that sense, I think we've tried to build the type of company that many of these talents are excited to join.
Yeah, exactly. And then lastly, I want to ask, we talked earlier about kind of being transparent in the recruitment, but if you think about the kind of journey that you have now went through, what has been the biggest fuck up in your kind of talent acquisition in Swarmia?
Well, I don't necessarily want to limit this to Swarmia because we actually have been pretty successful in the hiring so far. But I do think that the typical issue that comes up is that you're not 100% sure about hiring and was it successful, and then you kind of just keep going without actually managing the problem, and then small problems get big over time. And if you made a wrong hire, you just need to be able to react to that quickly. And yet it's incredibly difficult. And I made that same mistake multiple times in the history. So it's really difficult as you're scaling and there's so many competing priorities and so on. And yet you still need to be very systematic about it. So and for example, as a startup, it's not as if we had a very strict performance management process in place because I don't think it's appropriate necessarily for this stage. But it's something that you have to keep on the back of your mind that we have to think about these things all the time because not every hire is going to be kind of the hire we wanted to make and appropriate for this stage of the company, etc. So that tends to be the thing that happens if not every year, then at least occasionally.
Yeah, I think that happens to everyone who are making kind of like a lot of hires. You kind of at some point you make a mistake in the hiring. If you think about that one, I think it's a good learning opportunity as well. Like you have hired someone, then for some reason they fail in the job or you fail in kind of onboarding them or whatsoever. But then I think the important part is actually kind of identify what was the thing that we didn't figure out actually during the recruitment process, so we don't do kind of similar things in the past. So do you have any example on that kind of thing where you have kind of failed on validation at recruitment process and nowadays you are kind of validating that thing?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm definitely paying more attention to is simply like, did they actually answer all of the questions that we asked? It's possible to have a conversation where one is asking a bunch of questions and then there is a bunch of answers, but they are not answers to that question. And kind of what I said before about how the interviewers tend to be biased on just how good the conversation was and how nice it was to have that discussion. If you don't actually check that, like, did they actually check this box or not, you might easily kind of skip some steps. And some people are just really good at interviewing, and you have to be kind of cautious that you're actually making sure to cover the things that you intended to cover.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you got a lot of good ideas about SaaS talent acquisition. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share it on your social so others can hear it too. And if you have a topic in mind that you would like me to cover in this podcast, share it with me as well. I'm Samuli, CEO and co-founder in TalentBee, where we help fast-growing SaaS companies in their talent acquisition. Make sure to follow us, make sure to follow this podcast, and have an awesome week. Bye-bye.